how do we live life intelligently? We have an instruction manual for being human, and that's the Bhagavad Gita. And I have spent the past 40 years plus exploring various forms of spirituality from around the world and through all time. And I can say without a doubt that the Bhagavad Gita is the greatest spiritual book ever written. Everything we want to know about the spiritual life and how to live life intelligently is there in the Gita. Its structure is circular in many ways, so that you could come in at any point of the Gita and get value from it. One of the things that many of us like to do is just simply allow grace to teach us someday. We just open the Gita and see what's the verse that's going to speak to us for that particular day. But there is a structure. There is a structure in the Gita, and many people find it of value to know what's there and how it's composed. It's 18 chapters, for those of you who may not know, and many scholars divide it into 3 sections that correspond to the Mahavakya Tattvamasi, that thou art. And the first 6 chapters talk about who we are. The second 6 chapters talk about the infinite. And the last 3 talk about the connection. How are we, how do we participate? How do we realize? How are we one with that infinite? The first chapter is the Yoga of Arjuna Grief, and it lays out the problem. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the underlying story, Arjuna is a general. So in a modern context, we can think of him like General Dempsey, the commanding general of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Krishna, the divine incarnation of God, is Arjuna's charioteer. So you have to imagine General Dempsey in Iraq with God as his jeep driver. So that's the context. So many of the Hindu scriptures involve very pure people who are called to a life of renunciation, and we think of them as, they so easily, it seems, been able to give up the world and go off to the Himalayas to study. Not me. I want a family, I want a job, I want to have a career. And Arjuna is our spiritual everyman. So he's a great icon for those of us living here in America. Swamiji used to call it the man of knowledge downtown. So it speaks to people like you and me. It speaks to people like you and me. Gita teaches on 3 levels simultaneously. The first is as a Dharma Shastra. It gives us intelligent ways of acting in the world. And I'm going to spend most of my time this morning talking about that. Then for those who are called to it, we can identify with Arjuna as the spiritual every person. He is the archetypical seeker. He's the one who aspires to move along the spiritual path. But the Gita also teaches from the highest level, and we can be identified with Krishna. And it teaches about the highest realization and what our essential nature is. So the first chapter lays out this problem. Arjuna has an emotional collapse. He's taken, says to Krishna, take me out between the armies and let's see who we have to fight. He thinks like a general. Krishna takes him out there. And Krishna points out to him what's going on. He says, behold these armies now arrayed. And Arjuna looks across the battlefield and he sees his relatives. He sees the cousins he grew up with. He sees his teacher, his guru, in the art of warfare. And he begins to doubt whether or not he's made the right decision. Who here has ever faced a choice in life and you're not sure whether it's the right decision? Or after you've made it, you second guess it and go, oh my God, did I do the right thing? Maybe I should have done this, or maybe I should have done that. So this very human experience, I'm going to put this up a little bit higher so I don't slouch. Is that okay? Okay. This very human experience is something all of us face at times. So what he has is a personality disintegration. His impulses are carrying him one way. He's a warrior. He loves to fight. Then all of a sudden his mind comes in and says, I'm not sure I should do this. You know, I'm frightened. I'm going to be killing my friends and relatives. I'm sad about that. And then the intellect comes in and says, is this the right thing or is it not the right thing? And what he does is sit down in the bottom of the chariot, says, I will not fight. I think I should go to the forest and meditate. And Krishna, seeing the problem, like a good teacher, pokes at him. And he says, don't be Klybium. Get up and fight. Klybium is a hard word to translate. I think the best word the young people will get, don't be a wuss. Don't be a wimp. Get up and fight. And Arjuna goes, well, I don't know what I should do. And he whines. Then he starts to lecture Krishna, which I think is very funny. The Gita is laced with a lot of humor. A lot of humor. Now, in a Hindu scripture, there's a literary style. The literary style is the most important teaching, is the first thing out of the teacher's, the guru's mouth, the saint's mouth. That's for the A+ students. And then, if we have a middling intellect, as the scriptures say, it goes in and breaks it open and peels it apart. So what's the first thing that Krishna says? It's in the 2nd chapter, the 11th verse. You grieve for whom you should not grieve, though you speak words of wisdom. The wise grieve neither for the living nor the dead. And Arjuna looks at him, totally baffled. Sound familiar? Isn't it human to grieve? So in the 2nd chapter, it's what I call the table of contents of the Gita. He puts forward all the major ideas that he's going to cover through the whole work. And then in the last 16 verses, I think it is, we have the Sthita Purusha section, where Krishna describes the person of steady wisdom. So we get an idea of what the goal is. This is what a human being is supposed to live like. Arjuna looks at him baffled. So Krishna steps the whole thing down, and starting with the 3rd chapter, he begins to teach us how to live in an intelligent way. We call this teaching karma yoga. Karma is a simple word that simply means action. Comes from the root kri, to make or to do. We get words like karana, cause. We get kriya, cleansing. But karma simply means action. How do we act in the world in a way that's intelligent? So chapters 3, 4, and 5 go deeply into this, and I'm going to give you a definition that condenses the teaching of those 3 chapters. Act in the world according to our swadharma, our inherent latent proclivities, our mission, our vocation, our calling, in a spirit of selfless service, renouncing our attachment to the karma palam, the fruits of action, and our identification with the sense of agency. That's dense. Let's go through it again. Act in the world according to our inherent latent proclivities, our swadharma. Number 1. Number 2, in a spirit of selfless service. 3, renouncing our attachment to the fruits of action. 4, renouncing our identification with the sense of agency. 4 aspects of it. Let's break this apart. What is our swadharma? The exoteric, the outer definition of that is according to varna, according to our station in life, our birth. We have certain duties that we're supposed to perform. But there's a subtler meaning, a deeper meaning. And that is that each one of us has deep within our hearts something that we love to do. Many people question, well, what's God's will for me? God's will and our heart's deepest desires are not different. And many people think that the way through to the spiritual life is to suppress or deny those things. And Krishna is saying in the beginning, that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to identify what we want to do. And for each one of us, it's unique. It's unique. We have in psychology the term a superego. That's the waggy finger of parents and society. You should get a job. You should make a lot of money. You should have status. You should have position. You should have a big house. You should have a fancy car. And Krishna says, there's nothing wrong with those things, but the important thing is, what do you love to do? For some of us, it can take a long time to figure that out, to silence those shoulda, woulda, coulda voices in our heads, and to get in touch with our own swadharma. Swa means self. Dharma is the law of our being, our essential nature. So for young people especially, it's so important to pay attention. What do you enjoy doing? Now for us adults, I tend to ask people the question, well, if you had all the money in the world, you had all the education in the world, You had all the connections in the world. What would you be doing with your life? Oh, I'd take a cruise around the Caribbean. Well, that gets boring. That gets boring after a while. What would you like to do? Not have and not be, but do. And that can be a struggle. Many of us, we hit about the age 40 and we realize we've been living for other people's desires. And it's time for us to get in touch with what's our Swadharma. Then what do? Give it to the world. Spend ourselves in love. Give it away. Work hard in a spirit of selfless service. One of the things that afflicts so many of us, it's basically the human condition. There's a vulture that sits on our shoulder. And it's yapping in our ear. How am I doing? What do they think of me? Am I okay? Anybody ever have that vulture speak to them? There's a very simple way to shut it up. And that's to serve. That's to focus our attention on what we're doing and on other people. Seva. Service. It's such a simple tool. And here's the psychological mechanics. What that vulture does is it centers the attentive faculty of the mind on the ego. I, me, mine. And what service does is it shifts that. And then we're focused on our work and we're focused on others. So here's an assignment. It almost doesn't matter what your problem is. Try an experiment. Serve someone else. Take your gifts and give them away. Now, Swamiji, my teacher, used to say this. Don't believe a word I say. Everybody would be shocked. Be a spiritual scientist. Try these principles out in the laboratory of your own life, in the laboratory of your own mind. See what happens when you're self-obsessed, self-absorbed, I, me, mine, when we dedicate our lives, at least for a time, to service. And then you prove or disprove whether or not it's an effective tool. Now, once we start to get in touch with our heart's deepest desires, our mission, our vocation, our calling, our swadharma, we get a whole new set of problems because now we care a whole lot. And we start to have new issues arise. Fear of failure, competition, fear of success, envy, jealousy. We have an attachment to the outcome. So Krishna then gives us another technique. He says, what we need to do is renounce our attachment to the outcome. This is called the karma phalam, the fruits of the action. He says, thy right is to work alone, never to its fruits. So this is the practice we take on. We work and we let go of the results. Those belong to God. belong to God. This is easier said than done. But we get to watch these things arise. What actually happens, these attachments arise out of the unconscious and they come into view, then just don't do something. Stand there, watch them, and they'll dissipate. They'll dissipate. Just don't do something. Stand there. Turn it upside down. So this is the next assignment that Krishna gives us. Act vigorously in the world according to our inherent latent proclivities, renouncing our attachment to the fruits of action. The last one is very subtle, and this is the identification with the sense of agency. In Western philosophy and psychology, it's based on a presupposition that there's a thing, a solid thing called me, myself, with a small s, the individual. And what we want to do is actualize that individual or get better self-esteem. I want to somehow bolster, protect, or defend this sense of self. Yoga says that individual sense of self is fundamentally an illusion. It's a kind of thinking. It's not an entity. The word we use in Sanskrit is ahankara. Who's heard that term before? See, it's usually just translated as ego. But let's pull the word apart. Aham is simply the first person pronoun in Sanskrit. It means I. Kara, again, goes back to our root kri, to make or to do. So my translation of ahankara is I maker thoughts. It's this deep flow of thinking. It's the deeply rooted conviction that I'm the body, or I'm the body plus the personality. And what we find in the Bhagavad Gita is that's not who we really are. Who we really are is Brahman, the ground of being, the unconditioned awareness that at the core of who and what we are. So we learn to surrender this individual sense of self. We begin to penetrate through it. We begin to see what it's made up of and its fundamental unreality. And we begin to have a shift in our sense of identification from that sense of ego, ahankara, to something that's birthless and deathless and changeless. So that's the level that Krishna teaches on as a Dharma Shastra, predominantly. That's the first level. The second level he teaches on is for those of us who enter into the spiritual life in a conscious way. And we identify with Arjuna, the universal sadhu. You see. So what Krishna will give us is a series of practices that help to purify our inner equipment, what we call the antakarana, so that we are able to realize who and what we are. And these are called by Shankara as the qualifications of a fit student. These are the basic things that we as spiritual seekers need to acquire. And it can be a lifetime. Now, you don't need to acquire the qualifications of a fit student and then realize the self. All of yoga is only about acquiring the qualifications of a fit student. So that's the process. And I'll just touch on some of them. One of the ones that Krishna puts forward in the Gita is we need to attain to yoga rudha. Arudha is actually a riding term. Anybody here have horses? Okay. Well, we had horses when I was a kid. So one of the most awkward experiences, here's this big old horse in front of you. Gather the reins, put your hand on the pommel of the saddle with your left hand, and you put your left foot into the stirrup, and if it's not a well-behaved horse, it starts to move. So there you are, hopping around in a circle, trying to get on this horse. And finally, if someone holds the horse's head, or the horse is well trained, you swing your right leg over and you're mounted on the steed, and you collect the reins, and this huge, powerful beast you're in control of. So this is arudha. It's a riding term. See? But yoga arudha is mounting the steed of the mind. So, what is, practically speaking, yoga rudha? We need to find a place where we're willing to do anything for the rest of eternity, and we're willing to not do anything for the rest of eternity. Attaining to what he calls samadrishta, the equality of vision. Now, I've talked about this swadharma, this deep place within us. I call it the sense of rightness, this current that runs in our hearts. That current is very difficult to listen to when I have these screaming voices in each ear of my cravings on one side and my aversions on the other side. Raga, dvesha, we call it in Sanskrit. So that's what we need to deal with by attaining to yoga rudha. So the practice that we do is we take on what we call sakshi bhav. We adopt the viewpoint of the uninvolved witness of our own minds. And you watch this stuff come up. You watch these cravings come up. And most of us think that if I have a craving, I've got to act on it. And what the yogi begins to learn, by the way, a yogi is just someone who aspires to union. That's the way I'm using it. That's the way Krishna uses it in the Gita. So what we want to practice doing is we let those cravings come up and we just be present to them. It's simple. It's not easy. Sometimes we can't help ourselves. We act. You watch that. You watch that. And the other side, the aversions come up. I can't stand this. I'll never speak to that person again, etc. When these aversions come up, we notice them. The yogi operates from the viewpoint. This is axiomatic. if I'm disturbed, no matter the cause, I'm the one with the attachment. Yes. There are no exceptions to this. That doesn't mean the world and its people are oftentimes horrible. But that's not the point. The point is my reaction, my craving. Now, the word that we have is kama in Gita, which is usually translated as desire. That's not a strong enough word. We all can tell the difference between a preference and an insistence. We all have preferences. They will never leave us. But can you let it go? You see, I prefer this kind of chutney. We don't have any. That's okay. But if we have a quality of insistence, the need to control, that's what we want to begin to let go of. Accepting life on life's terms. Accepting other people as they are, without the compulsion to fix them or control them or change them. Anybody who's been in a marriage for a long time gets that one. How many of the women have tried for 40 years to change your husband? Has it ever worked? We can't change other people. We can't change other people. Now, this doesn't mean not to act. For example, if you have a job and you have an abusive boss, first thing as a yogi, we have to come to the place where we're at peace. But then if you look at it, okay, this person's never going to change. Is this where I want to work? Of course. Move on. But we know inside if we're attached. If we're attached. So in the Gita, Krishna says the yogi's mind needs to be the same. Heat and cold, suffering and pleasure, honor and dishonor. And these are what we call the dvandvas, the pairs of opposites. This is how we see life on its three levels. Heat and cold is simply a metaphor for all the physical things that we will face. If you're sick, can you be with it? Doesn't mean not to take medicine. And if your health is good, be mindful that too will pass. Sukham and dukham. Suffering and pleasure. These are the reactions of the mind. When the situation is conducive, based on the force of my past, the mind is happy. When the situation is non-conducive, my mind has a tantrum. And the rest of the time, that's what babies do. I tell you, your mind is no different now. So the yogi learns to not get so caught up in that. The situation is conducive, the mind is happy. Don't worry, it'll pass. If the situation is non-conducive, the mind is unhappy. Don't worry, it will pass. So this helps us to turn the volume level down on all that. The best way to control the mind is to get out of the mind. So we want to have the samadrishta, heat and cold, pleasure and suffering. Honor and dishonor are the conclusions the intellect, the buddhi, makes to a situation. I was successful here, I was not successful there. Shankara says we want to have a mind like a pot with a crack in it. So in rural areas of India, many of you remember this, the women will come down to the tank or the river and they'll get water in the huge pots. But if there's a crack in the bottom, the water just runs out. I think a modern Western image, you want to have a mind like a sieve. Just let it all come through. So when praise and honor comes in our direction, you graciously say thank you because it's polite, but you let it pass through. And if someone criticizes us, we have dishonor, let it pass through. Now here's the secret. Everybody's more than willing to try to let go of dishonor. But where we get hooked is on the honor side. So the practice is just to let it pass through. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. Let it go. Let it go. Now I could go on and on and on about the various tools to attain the qualifications of a fit student, to attain to yoga arudha, yoga rudha. But that's a brief taste of it. Then Gita teaches the highest knowledge. The knowledge that's found in the Upanishads, which is the most important part of the Hindu scriptures. Gita is called the milk of the Upanishads. And it basically tells us who we really are. Who we really are. And probably the best chapter to do that is, I think it's 13, Kshetra, Kshetranya, Vibhaga Yoga. Is that it? Is that the 13th chapter? The discrimination between the field and the knower of the field. So, it's a game, basically. We can all play the game. The game is this. I am the subject. Anything of which I can be aware, anything that's an object of knowledge, is anatman, not self. Kshetra, not self. Kshetranya, the knower of the field, it's me. So, do you all see the microphone? Does everybody see it? Who sees it? I do. That's yourself. You're not a microphone. Is that clear? You're the one who sees the microphone. Do you get the game? You see the table? Who sees the table? I do. I'm not a table. I'm the one who sees the table. And we can go, for example, to the sound of the heater. Do you all hear the heater? I'm not the sound. I'm the one who knows the sound. And we can go through anything perceived through the five senses and understand it that way. Now we'll go a little more subtle. Let's go to the realm of the body itself. So take a deep breath. Feel the breath in the body. Aren't you aware of that sensation? When you were a child, you had a little body. You went through adolescence and your body matured. Those of us who are adults, our body is changed again. Those of us who are north of 60, our bodies have really started to change. But have not I been aware of the changes in the body? I am not the body. I'm the knower of the body. And now we go to a realm a little more subtle, to the realm of feelings. Sometimes I feel joy, sometimes I feel sorrow. Sometimes I feel anger. Sometimes I feel love. Sometimes I feel enthusiasm. Sometimes I feel boredom. I have this whole range of feelings. But do not I know the feelings? I am not the feelings. I am the knower of the feelings. Now let's go one level more subtle to the realm of thought. In your head, do the problem 2 + 2. Remember what you had for dinner last night. See if you can visualize a strawberry. This place is called buddhi, or intellect, the vijnanamaya kosha, the intellectual sheath. The thoughts go by like my hand in front of my face. But do not I know the thoughts. Now, see if you can intuit or infer in a mind that's very quiet who knows the thoughts and the space between the thoughts. And it's tricky because it's like trying to look at your eyes. It's like trying to taste your tongue. It's like trying to shine a flashlight on its own batteries. But we can just use the heater noise as a little point of attention. See if you can keep your mind very quiet and notice who or what hears the heater sound. And you see it's like there's nothing there. Yoga Vasishtha uses this wonderful term, Chid Akash, the sky, or the space of consciousness. But I is. How do I know that I am? I don't see, hear, taste, touch, or smell myself. I don't emote myself. I don't think myself. I is Swayambhu, self-evident. Swayam Jyoti, self-luminous. But it has no boundaries, it has no edges, has no color, no shape, no form. It's birthless, it's deathless. And as the Upanishads say, Ayamatma Brahma. This self is Brahman. The consciousness that's the substratum of the entire creation. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Om Sri Gurubhyo Namaha.